Hello again. So this video is for third period. Since I won't see you on Friday, go ahead and get this lecture done so you can get the words highlighted. You can do your crossword puzzle. So this lecture is for the classification notes. It's chapter 18 out of the textbook for those of you keeping track at home. So humans have been trying to classify organisms for a long time. It started as early as Aristotle, who classified life basically into animals and plants. We now know, of course, that there are many other different types of life other than animals and plants. But it wasn't until Carol Linnaeus kind of came up with the system of binomial nomenclature that we really started looking at the classification of organisms. So we call the science of classification taxonomy. So Carol Linnaeus was a Swede who in the 18th century came up with a system called binomial nomenclature. So we of course know the prefix bi means two, nomenclature is like Latin for name, so binomial nomenclature is basically a scientific name that is made up of two names. So the first name is always capitalized, the second is lowercase, they are both in italics. Okay, so we have our example here, the polar bear is Ursus maritimus. Notice Ursus is capitalized and both words are italicized. So the first name in this is what we call the genus name. The second name here is is species specific. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So the categories that Linnaeus came up with are called taxons, and he said the biggest taxon is the kingdom. So we have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And as you move down this list, you get more and more specific until you get to species, and you're talking about only one particular type of organism. Now today, we use other things other than just looking at animals to kind of decide exactly what classification an animal fits in. We call this study of the relationships between organisms phylogeny. And if we look at this, we can tell that organisms that are in the same genus are more closely related than organisms that maybe branch off at the order level. So I'm going to go back a minute here. If you look at the picture, you can see as we move up, kingdom, we have a lot of different animals in the kingdom Animalia. As we go to phylum, chordata, it gets smaller and smaller, class, and then order, and then family and genus and species. So basically what I'm saying is organisms that share all of these, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, they are more closely related than organisms that only share kingdom, phylum, class, and order. So you can see here we have, it looks like a leopard, along with our panda and our black bear and our polar bear. Well, when we get down to the genus and we're talking about just bears, these guys are way more closely related than the organisms in this category. All right, so we can show a relationship, the evolutionary relationship of organisms using a cladogram. Basically, a cladogram looks at characteristics that have changed since the ancestral species that have kind of what we call emerged since then. We call these derived characteristics. So if you look down here, I know it's cut off a little bit, but on a cladogram, you have your line, which shows your ancestry, and then the characteristics that pop up here, these are what we call derived characteristics. We're going to spend a whole basically 2 days working on cladograms. We can also look at how closely related organisms are by looking at the similarities between our DNA. So for example, we share something like 50% of our DNA with a fruit fly, but we share 98.5% of our DNA with the chimp and the orangutan. So we can clearly see that we are more closely related to a chimp than we are to a fruit fly because we have more DNA in common. It is also the fact that all life uses DNA shows that we're related to basically all living things on Earth. We can also use what's called a molecular clock. There are some mutations that pop up in DNA at a steady rate. We can track these mutations through time through a genetic analysis to figure out basically how long it has been since an organism branched off. Now, Linnaeus did a really good job, and we're still using his system today, but we've had to make a couple of changes. When I was teaching in the early 2000s, we said that there were 5 kingdoms and we didn't have a domain. Then they went ahead and did some genetic analysis and realized that there was this one kingdom we called Kingdom Onera that actually needed to be separated out. So we went ahead and created another category on top called the domain. So this is the biggest category that we have. And there are 3 domains. The first 2 domains are all prokaryotes. And when I say prokaryote, I mean it's an organism that does not have membrane-bound organelles. So if you look inside of a prokaryote, you're not going to see a nucleus, you're not going to see an endoplasmic reticulum, none of those things that we normally think of as being inside of a cell. So there are two domains that are talking about prokaryotes. The domain Archaea. These guys are unicellular always, and they like to live in extreme environments. So they live where it's really hot, there's a lot of methane, where it's really salty, things like that. So these are not bacteria that you're going to come into contact with very often. And the only kingdom under the domain Archaea is the kingdom Archaebacteria. The second domain is the domain Bacteria. And these guys are unicellular, and they have cell walls made up of a starch, a carbohydrate called peptidoglycan. These are the bacteria that you think about when you think of bacteria. So when we did our antibiotic resistance lab, we're talking about these types of bacteria. And there's only one kingdom under the domain Bacteria, and that is the kingdom Eubacteria. The prefix Eu means true, so these are our true bacteria. The third domain deals with eukaryotes, and eukaryotes are organisms that do have membrane-bound organelles. So if you look inside of a eukaryote, you're going to see a nucleus and a lysosome and a vacuole and all the things you're used to seeing in a cell. So you would be a eukaryote. There are four kingdoms under the domain Eukarya. The first one is the kingdom Protista. The kingdom Protista is an interesting kingdom because it's kind of like all the things that didn't fit anywhere else we kind of shoved here. So organisms that are in the kingdom Protista can be either single-celled or multicellular. Some of them do photosynthesis. Some of them are heterotrophic, meaning they have to eat other organisms. So this is kind of a mishmash of a kingdom here. So examples of organisms that belong to the kingdom Protista are going to be algae, and then these little tiny things called diatoms that have this kind of hard silica shell on the outside of them. All right, the next kingdom in the domain Eukarya is going to be the kingdom fungi. Fungus are unicellular or multicellular. They are always heterotrophic, so they always have to eat other organisms, and they have cell walls made up of a starch called chitin. And the interesting thing about that is it is the same starch that you see in the exoskeletons of arthropods, so like bugs and things like that. And examples of fungus are yeasts, molds, and mushrooms. All right, so I have a joke. Mushroom walks into a bar and orders a beer, and the bartender says, "We don't serve your kind here." And the mushroom says, "But why? I'm a fungi." Right? It's a good one. If the mushroom was such a fungi, how come the party wasn't at his house? Because there was a mushroom. Those are my two favorite jokes all year. All right, I know you're laughing right now, so pause if you need to stop laughing. I'm going to go ahead and move on. All right, next up is the kingdom Plantae. So this is the third kingdom under the domain Eukarya. We all know what a plant is. Plants are always multicellular. They are always photosynthetic, and they have cell walls made of cellulose. So if you're thinking of something in its plant, guess what? It belongs in the kingdom Plantae. The fourth kingdom in the domain Eukarya is the kingdom Animalia. Animals are always multicellular. They are always heterotrophic, so we always have to eat other things for energy, and animals do not have cell walls. So this includes you, believe it or not, dogs, sponges, bunnies, birds, basically anything you can think of, it's going to be an animal. Lots of things you probably never think about, they're going to be animals as well. So here is our current way that we classify organisms: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Now, I don't ask you to memorize a lot. I'm going to ask you to memorize these levels. And I have a little mnemonic for you to help you memorize this. So it's dumb King Philip choked on fresh green spinach. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. There is going to be some point here in the future where you're going to come in and I'm going to ask you from memory to write these 8 classifications down in order. I'm going to need you to memorize them. Okay? So you're done with the notes. You should have highlighted 30 words. I encourage you to watch the crash course taxonomy video. You can find a link to that under modules in Canvas. Good luck on your crossword puzzle. I will post the colorings here in a couple of days, and have a great weekend.